I love the look of your microphone, Keith.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Something very like old-fashioned kind of about it.
My co-host on Next Picture Show, Jenna Yukoski, picked this out. She's like, it's very 70s sci-fi. I think it's a good one for you. So.
Yeah. It looks like it floats around and talks to you in like a Robin Williams voice.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a committed co-host move, getting you a microphone that they think fits your aura or something.
I appreciate that.
I think it was more coincidental, but yeah.
Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast for films that lean a little more on the agony than the ecstasy of cinema. I'm Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're joined by Keith Phipps, prolific film writer and editor currently behind The Reveal and author of the Nicolas Cage retrospective, Age of Cage, for a very special reverse episode. We've spent all year exploring the most difficult and extreme films cinema has to offer. But in the spirit of the season, we're looking at two uncharacteristic movies by directors known for their disturbing and graphic filmographies who just once let their watchable side get the better of them. First up is David Lynch and his G-rated Disney-produced The Straight Story, followed by gorehound Rob Zombie's family-friendly tribute to the 60s sitcom The Munsters. Can their hearts really grow 3 sizes, or will we have to tear them out of their chests?
Mom, you can come back in the room now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I am thrilled to welcome film critic Keith Phipps, who as head editor helped transform the AV Club into the pop culture staple it is today, or at least was until recently, a role that he served for sites like The Dissolve and Uproxx. His writing has also graced the likes of GQ, Vulture, The Ringer, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times, just to name a few. Most recently, he co-founded The Reveal, a site full of fantastic film writing from him and Scott Tobias, who can both also be heard on the Next Picture Show podcast. You can also currently get Keith's book, Age of Cage, 4 Decades of Hollywood Through One Singular Career, anywhere books are sold. Keith, it is an honor to have you. So much so, we're going to go easy with you on this one with maybe 2 of our least unwatchable films we've discussed yet.
And not to tip my hand too early, but starting off with a genuinely very, very good film. So you made to rename the I don't know, maybe just rename the podcast for this episode.
Yeah, this could maybe put the in parentheses.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. Did I get all your credits right there? Because you have.
Yeah. No, that was great. I was like, I've been on plenty of podcasts where they don't get it right the first time, and I have to be well. Actually, no, you got all my credit. It made me sound much more impressive than I actually am. So
Mark's been stalking you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes so far back with all these pop culture sites now that are so popular. I really feel like you've been there for the whole ride for them. I mean, does it feel like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the AV Club, when I started there, was, and still is, well, when there was still associated with the Onion, but we were the print section in the back of the Onion. We were like we would stay until 3:00 in the morning with and just like physically paste up pages and drive them into the printer at Cap Times and Wisconsin State Journal on a Sunday night, and I, from going to that, glad I really had that like sort of physical media era. I got to see the end of something and kind of the beginning of something, and now I'm suffering through what the internet has become in the last few years. But what else are you gonna do?
Sure. And you do have The Reveal now. Which, how long has it been since you guys launched that?
So we launched over a year ago. I think it was September, October last year, and it's been really good. I mean, and I've worked with Scott for forever, and we work really well together. And it's a space where we're both really active freelancers, but you can't always. This is a place where we can just write whatever we want, which is nice. And kind of pursue our own passions and also do reviews. Like I did reviews, so many reviews for years, and as a freelancer, it's like the one thing that publications just aren't interested in 99% of the time, and I still love doing them. So it's nice for that as well.
Okay, great. Because and as someone who is a big fan of The Dissolve while it lasted, it really does feel like that as far as having that wide ranging freedom. And and just long in-depth reviews or essays.
Yeah, that's what we like. I mean, the Zav was very much a group effort. It wasn't just Scott and me, but we're trying to bring a little bit of that feel to this as well.
All right, yeah, and of course, I do want to make sure everyone is aware they can grab your book. Of course, we don't have Nicolas Cage in either of the films that we're discussing today, unfortunately.
We gotta have you back for like Deadfall and Vampire's Kiss and shit someday.
Deadfall. That's a movie.
It's a
Vampire's
powerful
Kiss.
film.
Everyone knows Vampire's Kiss is a nutty movie with a very big performance. But Deadfall is like the secret one that not enough people is that and Xandoli are like the two like over the top Nicolas Cage performances that not enough people know about, or maybe the right number of people know about them.
Right. Fucking yeah. So good. Oh my god.
All right, yeah, maybe one day we'll do one of those, or The Wicker Man is probably somewhere down there on the long list. But
yeah,
everyone talks about The Wicker Man, though.
Well, we could be everyone too.
Did you ever hear any word back from Nicolas Cage about?
Actually, yeah. I reached out. No, it's fine. It's actually really good. It's actually kind of ideal because I reached out early in the process. I said, tourism management, and it's like, I'm doing this book. If I wants to talk to me, I'd love that. I never heard back. I didn't really expect to, and it would be a different book if it had like his input in it. And then I didn't hear anything about it. And then like out of nowhere I'm friends with the film editor at Rolling Stone, and he's like, sent me this screenshot like this is running tomorrow, and it was an interview with Cage, and he's like, Keith Phipps has this really good book out that uses my career to reflect on those changes in Hollywood or something along those lines. Like that's great. That is the right amount of I'm glad that he's acknowledged it, and he says approving words, and then I can't actually imagine having an in-depth conversation with him about it, so this is like the right amount of feedback.
That's great. That's all you needed to know.
Yeah, no, it was very gratifying. I didn't need that kind of validation, but it was nice to have it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it suggests that he might have actually read it too, which that must be a trip to imagine, or at least some of it.
He's a book reader. I did learn that in the course of research, so perhaps so.
I'd like
Probably
to think he only reads books about himself. Yeah, everyone he buys first.
Well, it's like me, and then a couple of really quickie biographies from the late '90s. So he'll have to fill the time other times some other way.
Right.
He can do the audiobook.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be amazing. All right. Well, the filmmaker that is our first topic of discussion is going to be David Lynch, who I would like to talk about a little in general before we get to the straight story, because this certainly isn't the film that he is most known for. Obviously, his career is full of films that are, in some way either creepy, disturbing. It can get under your skin. They are often very funny in their own way, but
very surreal, off the wall. People describe them as just nonsense. Some people say they're just total nonsense. And here he is straightening things out. It's wonderful to see, actually. Almost like answering those people who are like, well, this guy just does everything that comes into his mind and just it vomits up on screen or something. It's almost like he took this as the challenge almost to show that he could make a straightforward story called The Straight Story.
And it was how it received at the time. There was very much the can you believe David Lynch is making a G-rated movie for Disney as well, and that was kind of like the shocking. That was what was considered so shocking about it. That was what was edgy about this movie, was how not edgy it was.
Yes.
Yeah, he has been quoted as that he considers this to be his most experimental film, which for him does make a certain amount of sense. But Keith, what are your favorite Lynch films outside of this, or what's your general feelings about him?
I'm very pro Lynch, and but it's also kind of, and I like this movie an awful lot. It's also the kind of one I don't think about as often because it is such an outlier, and because it's in the middle of this run, like from Twin Peaks through Twin Peaks. Basically, he's kind of riffing on noir in one way or another, and this has none of that whatsoever. and in terms of favorites, I mean, well, obviously, Wild Heart's in there, of course, because I wrote the book, but it's actually probably not one of my top Lynches, which has changed a lot over the years. Sometimes these days it's kind of like whatever I watched last, but like there's movies that I did not, Lost Highway is the one where like I didn't even care for it at the time, and when I revisit it like 10 years later, like maybe this is his best movie. I don't even know, So the only one I haven't really, I mean, there's Dune, of course, but there's the only one I haven't really had that kind of breakthrough with otherwise is Inland Empire, which is I have a hard time getting past the look at that film. It's just the sort of consumer video quality circa 2005 or whenever they shot it. It's just still a little rough to watch, especially when he's just so beautiful. He makes such beautiful images when shooting on film or when shooting on better equipment. And this is not that.
Seth and I were just arguing about this the other night.
We were.
Yeah.
I love the lo-fi look. He can't stand it. He can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
We watched it a few years ago, and you didn't have that breakthrough moment, but maybe one of these days.
I think it's weaker for other reasons, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely a huge fan of Mulholland Drive. Is probably the one I would go for. But I also
Same
also love Eraserhead and Blue Velvet. For me, those are the kind of three that are on the top of the mountain as far as his films go, at least. Mm-hmm. And you're right. The Straight Story does come kind of like right in the middle of those runs, shortly before Mulholland Drive, and it's interesting how, his films are known for kind of dealing with small towns and exposing the rot and perversion and this kind of nightmare version of Americana. But there is kind of a fondness in there, I think, along with his deconstructing of it. And so much of it is just about him putting his subconscious up on the screen that you can tell this is something that he's interested in and fond of, even when he's turning it into something scary or surreal. And it's interesting to see him with the Straight Story use that same setting, but without subverting it in any way.
Yeah, totally. Even in Blue Velvet, you can see that the opening is genuine in its way, which is like this slow motion like montage of the suburbs. And in any interview with him, you can see he is like, I'm a weirdo. I love avant-garde cinema and paintings, and like he's totally off the wall, but at the same time he loves sugar and hamburgers and hot rods, and he's an all-American boy at the same time. And so in a way this is an off-the-wall choice, and in another way Straight Story kind of feels in his wheelhouse at the same time. I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I think he genuinely has. And so there's a lot of genuine idealization of this sort of like 50s small town America in it, to the point where I think, in some ways the quintessential David Lynch work might be the 8th episode of the Twin Peaks: The Return, where it's like this 1950s America, presented as like this fallen Eden with like this evil invading it around the same time as, along with the threat of nuclear war. It's just like, it's very much like his own very personal vision of where things went wrong, or how people kind of veered off the path of what America should be in some ways. And I think, he's very fond of images that reflect that in some ways. And I think the small towns in Iowa and Wisconsin you see here are, especially like that long stop he makes, in which I forget what city it is, but that long kind of layover.
Lawrence?
Yeah, that's where he's from. The long layover he makes in, when he gets stranded halfway through, like that to me is like a place I think Lynch would happily live, or at least, want to spend a lot of time visiting. I mean, he was spending a lot of time. I don't know how much you know about the background of this movie, but he was spending a fair amount of time in Madison, Wisconsin at this time. And that's when I lived there too. But Mary Sweeney, his wife at the time, and the co-writer of this film and his editor for many films, or a stretch of films anyway, was from there, and they'd summer there, and he kind of like worked with the print, he'd do prints at the printmaking collective at the university, and I saw him like just present some short films. He was like around, it's like you wouldn't necessarily see him like walking down the street or whatever, but he was very familiar with this part of the world.
Yeah, and I think that helps explain too, I guess, how he came to this project. Was it was his longtime, partner Mary Sweeney who really was behind developing this. That she was the one who read this New York Times article about the real Alvin Strait. This is based on a true story, and she produced and co-wrote the film. And I imagine that was how it ended up, being something that David Lynch agreed to actually direct and put his name behind. And like you said, she edited this film. She also edited the Twin Peaks film and Lost Highway, and later on Mulholland Drive. And I couldn't find a whole lot about this true story that it was based on. I mean, it is basically what you see on in the movie about a real guy, Alvin Strait, who is 73 years old and drove a riding lawnmower like 240 miles from Iowa to Wisconsin. And that's basically exactly, what we get in the movie. It's kind of this like, human interest story you might read about in the newspaper that somehow made its way to Lynch. And yeah, it's funny watching the film start out. We get this cosmic shot of the stars and these helicopter shots of like fields of grain and this idyllic looking town, this slow push in on like a lady eating pastries and this mysterious thump. And this really could just turn into Blue Velvet any second. And,
or Twin Peaks. It
but
still has
never
the
does.
same musician. Yeah, the same musician makes the music for a lot of this as the Twin Peaks guy. And it has a little bit of that feel. Some of the synthesizer parts and even the violin parts are like sweet but sad. I don't know. And I adore all the returning motifs of space and stars in this movie. And I love that we start and we end there. Because so much of the surrealism here, which I do think there is, like, despite it being his straight story and it being based in reality and based on a true story, there is like this, there's just still a dreaminess, a distinct surrealness, which I think comes from it being from this perspective of a man who knows that he's sort of on his way up to the stars, to the next level, to death. I don't know. That's what it keeps pointing to me as. And it also points to his brother. They say that they used to look up at the stars together, and the brother is a big part. That's who he's going to visit, who they had an argument that he can barely remember what it was about, but they haven't spoken for 10 years, but he's going to fix things. I don't know. It's all this reaching for something greater. I love that.
Yeah, and the stars imagery kind of recalls Elephant Man and as well. I mean, there's this. It's
Eraserhead.
very much. Yeah, for sure, and it's unmistakably a Lynch film in other ways too. In some ways, weirdly, what it reminds me of most is Wild at Heart, as it's a road movie where they keep they meet memorable eccentrics at every stop, and there's the same kind of. His strange characters are kind of like the G-rated versions of some of the Wild at Heart characters, where like there's just people who seem like I keep thinking about the woman who hits the deer and the way that woman performs the character, the specific language she uses, and like the punchline of like, and I love deer. It's so Lynch. I mean, and just the way things are shot too, like the dissolves, like I like the heartbreaking flashback to SpaceX character Rose Strait when he's talking about how her children were taken from her, and the way those dissolves are very much a Lynch technique. The way like they use I was thinking about when just the little moment when the bicycles pass them by, and the way that he uses ambient noise in that is so in keeping with the way he approaches sound in his other movies too. But it's like appropriately a more hushed version of a David Lynch soundtrack.
Yeah, those scenes in particular are where I can kind of feel that they're Lynchian in a way. The lady going on the rant about hitting deer all the time, the way she just kind of shows up and disappears, from the movie, the bikes, the time that he ends up in a town and they're kind of having a practice fire that firemen are putting out, like where the whole town is gathering to watch it. Those are all things that you feel like would only come from him, that kind of focus on that.
Yeah, he can't be hidden. He can't hide.
Yeah. And speaking of Sissy Spacek, I do want to talk about the cast. For anyone who hasn't seen the film, we have Richard Farnsworth as Alvin Straight, who was 79 when he shot this. It was his last film role. He's an actor who I'm not terribly familiar with. I think I know him most as the sheriff from Misery. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what's in my mind the most. But he was nominated for an Oscar in 1978 for a Pakula film, Comes a Horseman, which I have not seen. He was nominated for this as well.
Another Nicolas Cage tie-in.
Right.
Sure.
And we do then get Sissy Spacek, who plays his kind of special needs daughter, a performance that I really enjoy. And it's almost a shame
fantastic.
that there aren't more scenes between the two of them, because their relationship is really sweet. And I did kind of miss her at certain points because, after their last phone conversation, he pretty much leaves the focus of the story to, his journey.
I'm sure that's one of those things that, like, on the page probably didn't seem as important, but once Sissy stepped into that role, yeah, I'm sure there was like, I wouldn't be surprised if there were things that were added just because it was so, like, it's such a good performance. She's so good to watch. I would watch a whole movie with this character, I feel like.
Yeah, she gives her such dignity too. I mean, SpaceX always great. Farnsworth is someone who didn't get a lot of lead roles. Actually haven't seen Comes a Horseman either. I should at some point. But I remember this is a film that I saw as a kid. 82 film called The Gray Fox, which is another lead performance where he plays like an elderly stagecoach robber. So he was already playing like elderly characters many years, or 17 or so years before this one came out too. But he's really good in The Natural as well. But yeah, SpaceX.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny. I just watched this. I just rewatched. Badlands not too long before this, so it was kind of neat to see two SpaceX performances back to back, and yeah, she's always reliable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I could also go back to a point you made about the structure, it is one of my favorite kinds of structure, the way the movie works with the as he's going along this journey, and it did remind me of Wizard of Oz, which there are motifs in Wild at Heart, which is an interesting parallel there because it has this, like, yeah, whether it's Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland, like, I love that kind of episodic journey where it's like wander for a while, meet some strange character, have a strange interaction, and then wander a little further and find another. I just thought that was kind of sticking in my head the whole time.
I haven't seen it yet, but there's a documentary that came out earlier this year called Lynch Oz, which kind of pursues that whole connection to Wizard of Oz through his whole filmography. I'd like to catch up with that at some point.
Whoa, I want to see that.
Yeah. And I want to talk about these encounters that he has, maybe just, which ones stuck with you guys the most, or if they all worked as well for you. Because we do get kind of a slow trickle of information that we learn about the main character through these conversations. They all seem to have, their own kind of theme behind them. And a lot of the film are these kind of late night conversations around campfires, basically with people who are all, happily, patiently listening to him, just in the way that the film itself is very, quiet and gentle and meditative. You really feel like this is a way for all these characters to kind of share in something. And, there's kind of more minor ones, like when he's talking with has a brief conversation with the bikers, just about the pain of getting old. And then there's, more substantive ones like this scene in a bar with another old man where they suddenly start sharing war stories and get very emotional. That's a
showstopper because this is, and he's very quiet in the way he approaches it. But this is a generationally and regionally, these are not characters who talk about their past or their feelings. So it's such an extraordinary scene, the way it plays out. I also really love the encounter with the pregnant runaway. And it's like, just kind of talking about how, there's people that probably miss her more than she thinks. It might be worth the anger she might face just to be with her family. It's lovely stuff.
Yeah, I especially love the little kicker at the end of that, where he comes out to find the bundle of sticks, reflecting a
Mhm.
story that he told her.
Yeah, everybody seems to have like
Absolutely.
a almost mystical reverence for him. At least, or if they don't start with it, they eventually get it very quickly. Almost to like surreal effect. I enjoy almost all of the encounters. The ones that feel a little weaker are the ones that kind of maybe harp a little too hard on like his charm being that he's just like from an older time, and we as moderns just can't keep up or understand his ways or something. Like there's the one where he like talks the twin. He has like, of course there's twins in this movie because it's David Lynch, and they're fixing his tractor at a certain point, and they give him the quote, and he like gives like a little speech real quick about like, well, you're not doing much work, are you, blah blah blah, like grandpa kind of stuff that like talks them down on their price real fast. Like they're like suddenly terrified of his like I don't know, seniority or something, which I don't know. Like some parts like that kind of are like these like, all right, well, I don't know, like these guys, maybe money was different back in your day, Mr. Straight, but they're probably right to charge you, and you're just being like one of those crotchety old men. If it was like in real life, I would be frustrated with Alvin Straight quite often if I was like a worker and he's like telling me like, well, you didn't work real hard for this, that whole
Well, Seth
grandpa
fixes tractors
spiel.
on the side, so
I
has a
do.
little, it's his little bias there. I enjoyed the haggling part of that. It does seem like it kind of ends with a moral, with him, talking about his own brother,
Right.
and there were brothers who were fighting, and
Hmm.
that's a little bit broader maybe than other parts with that.
I like
But
that aspect of it, but yeah, it is this like sort of like just by default, by being from an older age, it like is this implication that the old times were the better times or something at all, like, which I don't know, I just don't always agree with, and like actuality.
Yeah, but look at
But
those guys. You know they're not giving him an honest. They didn't work that hard.
it's Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Yeah.
yeah.
They're Farley brothers. They're not playing hardworking characters.
Yeah, when I saw that in the credits, I was like, oh, that's who those were.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, but I do think a lot of the, humor in this movie does work. That there's
Hmm.
especially scenes that just have these little details, or that are allowed to play out longer than another director might let them. Few examples would be like, besides the haggling with the twins, I know Sissy Spacek has like a conversation with a grocery store clerk, about all of the hot dogs she's buying or
The
something. And
wieners.
yeah, and
Mhm.
they have a kind of little pause where they're just staring at the products, and she's like, I hate Bunschrager or whatever that brand was. Or my favorite part, which is him buying this grabber in the
Yes.
hardware store. Like, oh, well, that's a darn good grabber, Alvin. And he stretches out this whole scene about this guy not wanting to sell his good grabber, and I found that very funny.
Not to
Yeah, the
harp too
pacing
much
is
on the
is
Wizard of Oz thing, but like the way that his town that he lives in, minus like Sissy Spacek and like a couple other people, it feels like he lives in a magical town of old people. Like when he like
mm,
leaves to go like start on his journey, it's like all these old men with white hair like chasing him down the street, like, where are you going, Alvin? What's going on? I just love that scene. There's something really strange about it.
Yeah, and so one question I want to consider and get both of your guys' take on is, if you could just imagine maybe not knowing that this was a David Lynch film, would you? We've distinguished things that do make it apparent that it's him, but do you think that you would come to that conclusion on your own if you didn't know, or maybe if you'd even look at the movie differently, if say this was directed by no one's really coming to mind. I don't know, like a Alexander Payne or something, although his would be much more cynical or something, but he deals with this kind of
mhm.
milieu a lot, or something. Is there more to, would we see this maybe more as just like a little, unassuming story with some extra nice grace notes?
It's too
Um,
peculiar, I think,
mhm.
to look at it that way. I mean, it's just got this strange rhythm to it. It does the scene like you're talking about with the grabber. That plays out like in a really. It doesn't take its time. The whole movie is kind of that way, where it kind of moves at its own pace. There's no. This is definitely not a film made from a screenwriting handbook. There is it's just
Mhm.
kind of one incident piled on top of the other. I do think, as we've been talking about, there you get his story along the way reflected in the people he meets, as well, which I think that's kind of how it's structured, but it's definitely not a first act, second act, third act kind of film. It's I think it's, and I think, I don't know, if I'm being honest, would I immediately sniff this out as a David Lynch film? Perhaps not, but I definitely don't think you can see it as like an ordinary Disney heartwarming film from that
Mhm.
era. That would have come out around this time.
Yeah, some aspects of it kind of point towards, like, for a moment I could see, if I didn't know that it was Lynch, I would kind of feel like this is like a borderline Hallmark movie or something. But then there are these like strange flourishes, and if you do stick with the whole thing, regardless of if you know David Lynch or not, I think you're not going to walk away from this. I mean, you could show it to your mom, but it still has this like strangeness. It's a unique movie, unlike any other of its kind, as far as the like watery eyed true story like genre, I guess. There's just a certain sparkle to it that I don't see in others.
It's funny. The first time I saw this, I actually did watch it with my mom, uh, who enjoyed it at the time.
This is the
But
mom episode.
yeah, I do see, a little bit. I don't think that this is like a Hallmark movie, but there are some moments. I really do like Angelo Badalamenti's score, especially the main theme with the
Hmm.
the strings and acoustic guitar. There are a couple music cues maybe that get a little treacly, here and there. But for the
Hmm.
most part, I think he keeps things, more plaintive than that. And especially if you look at the ending, which, I mean, we pretty much spoil anything on this podcast, but I don't necessarily have to say exactly, what it is. But when he does finally, have this climactic moment of reaching his brother, who turns out to be Harry Dean Stanton, which I did not remember until he showed up on screen. And they basically
Almost
have
pulls
like,
me out a little bit, but
yeah, they have just like one very brief exchange, and then it's over. Before they have a big catharsis or conversation, which is not something I would see another filmmaker doing.
they both look up, and then
Hmm.
we cut to the stars again, and it's over.
I mean, these guys are not guys who are going to talk about their feelings or even like,
Mhm.
talk about the argument they had. They're just kind of going to accept it and move on. I think that kind of fits. I do love, yeah, that final shot where you recall them looking at the stars as kids. I think it's a really nice touch as well.
Which, again, I go back to being like a central object of like kind of unique strangeness with this movie that does kind of answer any of the aspects of it, where, like, again, if I didn't know who Lynch was, I might have more questions about, like, is this like a super patriotic movie or something like that, or like, if is it like harping on a specific, like, oh, the old times were better or something. uh that aspect of it being this, like, I don't know, looking at the stars as this strange gateway is unique to this, I think, and keeps it from feeling like that. Again, this is all just hypothetical. Of course, we know it's David Lynch, and we know David Lynch, so but
Yeah,
I
and
think.
oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. I think one, another way of looking at it also is like, this is taken from a human interest story. I haven't read the original New York Times story. I imagine it goes deeper than most of your human interest stories of this type, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, that's a neat story, you know, and like you never really think beneath the surface of it. And like this is a film that asks you to hang out with Alvin Straight and get to know him and know every, know learn about a lot about his life. I mean, it's so easy to be, this is a cute old man doing a cute old man thing, but to him, this is a very serious thing. And again, I keep coming back to that scene in the bar where it's like, this is someone who has a lot of trauma he's never really sorted through. And as someone who is, never had a chance, not even, he wasn't expected to talk about what he'd been through and wouldn't be inclined to talk about what he'd been through. And so we kind of just spend some time with someone who, and get to know them, who's not easy to get to know. I think that's what one nice aspect of this film.
And I think that it's very much about mortality, and this journey is definitely, it's more than just reconciling with his brother. This is something that he's doing that means something almost spiritual to him, to the point where he turns down, help from people or getting a ride late in, because it's just something that he needs to do. And for me, it's really hard for me to separate what I know in real life about this movie, which is that Richard Farnsworth he had terminal cancer when they were shooting this movie, and he was in a lot of pain while they were doing it, and he died barely a year after it came out by taking his own life as part of his response to the illness. And remembering that makes so much of his scenes, it adds so much gravity to them that it was almost painful in certain parts. Like I got very sad watching a lot of his scenes, just knowing how completely raw and true to life that was. And that's something, maybe wouldn't have registered as powerfully if I, didn't know that, or if I knew that he had, 10 more films ahead of him. But knowing you're actually watching a dying man, I'm giving this lovely performance and reflecting directly on it.
And Alvin feels like a dying character. I mean, he's visibly, he's aged, and he is not. He has that checkup at the beginning, like the doctor it's not a happy prognosis, and he's too stubborn to change anything at this point, and he knows it. This feels very much like a final chapter for him, and he knows it very, very deeply. This is a final act of some sort, a final ritual. And to Keith's point, that by the end, when the two brothers meet, that they aren't going to have a big conversation. They're not going to talk about their feelings. And almost like he knew that would be the case. And maybe part of this crazy the aspect of this, that he had to do this in a tractor and not get help and not get a ride. It comes to fruition when Harry Dean Stanton, his brother's character, looks at the little tractor that brought him here and starts tearing up when he finally comes. And he doesn't have to say a word after that. He said, "You came in that thing," and then that's basically like the end of it, right? And that's all that needed. He expressed what he needed to express through this journey, and his brother can see what he did for him.
All right, then. So what I want to do is, I think it's pretty clear that none of us are going to unwatch this lovely movie, right? But
I do heartless.
But I do want to give everyone a chance just to, say any final thoughts maybe that you had about it, or any aspect that we didn't get to, or if nothing else, where this falls in Lynch's filmography for you. So Keith, do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, I kind of wish, he's not very prolific anymore. I kind of wish there were more David Lynch films in general, but it'd be nice if there were more outliers like this too. It is knowing, not that I admire his work greatly, as we've already covered. But the fact that he could do this, makes me kind of wonder what else he could have done. Obviously, Return of the Jedi. But
yes,
I still can't imagine what that film would look like. But
it's fun too,
maybe
though.
a few more side trips like this would have been cool to see. It's hard to remember now, but this was this arrived at a real low point in terms of his critical and commercial stock. I mean, Fire Walk with Me was not a hit. Lost Highway was not a hit, and neither were particularly well received. And like I said before, I don't think I cared for either of those movies too much at the time, although I like them quite a bit now. And this was, though it's before Mulholland Drive, his filmography, he'd already made the Mulholland Drive TV pilot at this point, and it had been rejected by, I believe it was ABC was the network. And at this point, it was going to air as a TV movie, just as like the pilot version. So this was, I can see where the impulse to do something new was could have been driving him at this point, and it would, I appreciate that about it, and so I do wish there were a few more little oddities like this, but whatever, we got this one.
Yeah, we did get this one, and I totally agree. I wish, as much as I love that David is in this particular position where he does get to do basically specifically like the strange things that come into his mind, and his vision is like what first and foremost he seeks, and what he is fortunate enough to do quite often. Not often enough, I agree, but I think this kind of makes me wish in some ways he was more of a working director, at least in the past, that we could have seen him just bring his touch to just about anything. I think he would rise to the surface and just really elevate whatever it is that he's working in, which I think is always really interesting with an artist. But yeah, I think this doesn't strike me as much of an outlier anymore in his filmography. I do think the more you get to know him, the more you get to know his work. I'm surprised we don't have more of this side of the sort of surreal, mystifying aspect of American life, where because he loves both. That's the thing. He loves the dark strangeness, and he loves the beauty, which is always at war and sort of slowly becoming indistinguishable from one or the other, the ugliness and the beautiful aspects in movies like Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet quite often. And I like that we do spend for once just kind of in the beautiful side of things.
Yeah, I do. I love the idea of him, directing a script that he didn't write, whether, a David Lynch work for hire, just because I think this shows just what a capable filmmaker that he is, that this is such a well shot and beautiful movie. Outside of the things that we've identified as being recognizable by him, there's just all of these, landscape shots and things that you wouldn't normally associate with him. That are just, really handsome here, and that he does have a good, a way with working with actors, and the way that this brings all of that stuff to the surface, just his, base level craft, is something that I find really rewarding and interesting. So, he's definitely a guy who's kind of defined by his brand right now, that, as this auteur, and is very much in control of every little aspect of what he does. And it brings certain expectations to any kind of project that he's doing. So yeah, something like this, I think, does highlight things about him that might not be as immediately apparent. And I also wish that, we just got more from him at this point, more just anything, since it has been, so long. It would be great if every couple years there was a new David Lynch movie, but
A Marvel movie,
I might have to see that if that happened.
I'm surprised they never turned one of the new Star Wars over to him just to apologize for him not making Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, they need to even that score somehow.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, 3 thumbs up then for The Straight Story. I'm very interested to see where everybody ends up on our next film, which has pretty much nothing in common with The Straight Story, except that it's the first, kind of family film made by a director who, even more so than David Lynch, has never made anything remotely that you would watch with children or, in some cases, anyone that you love. So I want to dive right in then to talking about Rob Zombie. Keith, Munsters aside, where are you on the camp of, finding some of his work interesting? Are you not a big fan? Because he's pretty polarizing.
So I missed a few. I missed the last three: Lords of Salem, 31, and Three from Hell. And the thing with Rob Zombie is I don't always love his movies, but I love that he's out there making them because there is his own unique vision. He likes a lot of things, some things I do. I love the classic horror films and what he does with them. That whole like aesthetic that he digs into, and old grindhouse films and things like that. I find his Halloween really, really defensible. Like I think that's that's a whole other podcast episode. But I do think he's
you're not
doing
alone.
something really interesting in that movie as well. And just kind of like I just kind of like him and as a personality as well. I don't think this is telling stories out of school, but we interviewed him for the AV Club like years ago, and out of nowhere I get a request like saying, my kid is a big Rob Zombie fan. He's very sick. Can you put me in touch with him? And I was like, I really can't. But I passed that on to his publicist, and time passes. I get an email from this woman again. She's like, oh my God, Rob Zombie like sent me like just all this stuff. It's just like he said, like he just really hooked her kid up with all this autographed Rob Zombie stuff, went above and beyond. So that's I have some warm feelings just because of that as well.
Totally.
I'm pro Zombie but if you ask me if I really would, can I just film every aspect of say House of a Thousand Corpses? Not really. I remember I not really caring for that film very much at the time, but having like a couple of scenes that were like, wow, this guy can really make a great film someday. So, so pro Zombie, I guess, short version.
That's pretty much the same place I'm coming from. And we actually did do a whole episode on him earlier this year, talking about The Devil's Rejects and Halloween 2. So we did get pretty in depth into his weaknesses and strengths, I think both of which are pretty significant. And I agree that his actual filmmaking has so much energy and invention to it that
so visually exciting.
Yeah, and his weaknesses as a writer are kind of what frequently get in the way of that for me. So there's not necessarily one movie of his that I could point to of being like, oh, this is full out, I love this, I think it totally works. But there's always some element in there that makes it, whether it's in a confrontational way or just in a kind of hallucinogenic visual kind of way, that he definitely has his own voice as an auteur. And again, just like you said, Keith, I'm kind of behind him, in theory, but not so much to the point where I also didn't skip his last couple of movies because they really just didn't seem to, the buzz seemed so bad around them. Is he's kind of, I don't know, almost fallen out of favor since his glory days, around the Halloween and Devil's Rejects time, and maybe not unfairly.
It seems like his stuff is always getting like praised in retrospective. It just takes a little while, and he'll always have his cult. I also love the Halloween movies that he does, and even I can totally see like the things that are wrong with them and the things that are wrong with a lot of his movies. But yeah, I agree that he has a unique visual approach to things, and I just like that he seems to really not give a fuck. He really does do things the way he wants to do them, and sometimes it's like for the best, sometimes it's for the worst. It feels very much that he's making them for his friends too, which is kind of fun. And I definitely think that's going on here
as well.
Yes. With his friends specifically. Like in this movie, these are not like big names. It's his wife and like various characters that you like kind of bit parts that I noticed like from various zombie movies. Like I think, what's his face who plays Herman Munster in this is like, he's a guy who gets killed in Halloween 2 and a guy who's kind of like the nice guy in Lords of Salem. But like, I haven't really seen him in a ton of other things. And there's a couple other like characters like that, but he doesn't care. He like, these are the people that he likes to make movies with, and he's going to make movies with them,
which is kind of great, kind of old school in that way, like backyard filmmaking almost.
And I actually think this is a flawed film. I'm sure we'll get into it. And when it first was announced, I'm like, so who's the cast of this Rob Zombie's Monsters? And it's like, oh, really? I don't, I'm not sure I know most of these people, but I think everyone in it's really good, though. I think Jeff Daniel Phillips as Herman is a lot of fun, and it's not just doing a Fred Gwynn impression. And I really love Sherry Moon Zombie as Lily. I mean, she's very
Me too.
vulnerable and sweet, and it's just kind of convincing as a real character, not just like someone doing a goof of a vampire woman as an innocent, lovelorn person. I don't know. I think they're both really good.
I think she embodies Lily quite a bit. I think she's the one that nails it the most for me.
Yeah.
I think because she kind of stays closer to the original character, where I think like Grandpa in particular like rubbed me a bit. Whereas like he just had like a totally different kind of subdued demeanor. The accent was really different. Which I love Grandpa. Like, I love the Munsters in general, and yeah, like I just found that like lacking. I didn't hate Herman, but it did feel a little like he was trying to spin it in a certain way, and I don't know like if it was always working for me though.
Well, just to get some background on this, for the original show, The Munsters, in case anyone doesn't know, that ran from 64 to 66 on CBS. It was actually produced, I think, by the creators of Leave It to Beaver. And I kind of went on a little binge, like a marathon of the original show in the week leading up to watching this movie, just so I could
They're
make sure
so fun.
I was very familiar with it. And I did have a blast with it because it very much is about kind of parodying sitcom tropes, almost in a way that it almost has more in common with, say, the 90s Brady Bunch movies than the original Brady Bunch, even though it was much closer to that, because, it does rely on, there's lots of hokey puns and silly visual gags, but I think they age a lot better because there's kind of a winkingness to them. And, it's kind of sending up the sitcom form, and it's very fun in that way. And I think the cast is really great. We have Fred Gwynn as Herman, Yvonne DiCarlo as Lily, and Al Lewis as Grandpa. And they're just very funny. I was just very charmed by this series. And apparently this was something that Rob Zombie was a self-proclaimed super fan of, and that he's been trying to make a Munsters movie for his whole career. Even before House of a Thousand Corpses, he had this idea. So this really is a passion project for him.
Which just as a factoid is cute as hell. That's just, regardless of how you feel about the movie.
And like you said, he did kind of feels like he drew on his friends for this. For Herman, this Jeff Daniel Phillips, apparently he was the Geico caveman from the caveman commercials.
What?
Yeah.
So was Nick Kroll at one point too, I believe.
Oh yeah, maybe. Which actually it turned into like a sitcom briefly. And I was surprised by that. And his wife, Sherry Moon Zombie, anyone who's seen his films knows that she's in all of them. And I was kind of most leery about her, getting cast in this role for that reason. And I also agree with you guys that I think she came out on top because she is doing an imitation, but that's kind of what I'm looking for, I guess, with this movie, that she captured the spirit and is the only one who kind of feels like she is in an old sitcom. Even though I think there's aspects of the movie that are kind of actively working against that whole presentation. And then we have Daniel Roebuck as Grandpa, who's basically a character actor. I guess he was on Matlock and in the Fugitive movie and other zombie films. Apparently he played Jay Leno in the Late Show movie. That was maybe the most significant thing that I saw there.
Yeah, I think it's his highest profile role. But yeah, he's one of those guys who just works all the time. Though, most people, like when you figure out who he is, like, oh yeah, that guy, but it takes a while to get there.
Yeah, there's a few that guys in this movie. I know Jorge Garcia from Lost is in kind of like a new invented character.
Sylvester McCoy, a former doctor on Doctor Who, as Igor.
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, there's lots of stuff in there. There's a spirit, to this.
Yeah, you can
Um,
tell they really wanted what's his face who played the clown in House of a Thousand Corpses. It really felt
Sid
like
Haig.
Sid
he
Haig,
was
yeah.
supposed to be Grandpa, but he died, and I don't know. They got this guy. I don't know. That's just what struck me.
That seems very plausible.
Yeah, I think so. And but this is an origin story, so this is not something that just picks up where the show was. And I think that's where my problems start with this movie, is that for me, very much the charm and humor of the original series was about the dissonance of, seeing these hoary tropes filtered through these macabre characters. And you always have normal people around as foils. Where this movie, for the most part, till like, I don't know, the last 20 minutes, it takes place in pretty much an entire kind of tacky, like stylized Halloween world full of other monsters. Even the glimpse you get of people like on TV are these kind of grotesque Dick Tracy types that are not very much set in reality. And I think it kind of got off on the wrong foot with me for that reason.
Well, and it's set in the real place of Transylvania, which I'm sure looks exactly like it does in this film, right? I mean,
I've
Right.
been there. Yes.
No, I kind of like that part. I kind of like the like sort of like low budget live action version of Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas in some ways, but it went on for a long. This film is very oddly structured, or if you want to use the word structured with it, like as an origin story. Maybe we should gotten to the actual setup a little sooner. The culture clash is sort of a big part of this, and there's no culture clashing going on. It's just a lot of odd stuff. That said, some of my favorite stuff is in the beginning. I love Herman Munster. It makes no sense. Nothing in the film really follows logically from the thing that came before, but Herman Munster Rockstar is a really fun section of this film.
Yeah, I do love Halloween World or whatever it is. It's just so visually off the wall and so fun to look at. I can't help it. It is really gaudy. It's really tacky. It is on purpose, and that's one of the like sort of campy aspects of. There's a lot of campy things going on here on purpose that don't work, but the visual look is what worked for me, and that's what kept me going through those stretches, even though what was going on in some of them was like not really working, like as far as like dialogue and things like that. But I do kind of agree that I couldn't help but like by the third act, which I was dreading because I was like, all right, this movie has already gone on so long. The third act is actually the most interesting, and you kind of realize it because it's when the actual recognizable aspects of the Munster show starts to become manifest, which is kind of unfortunate in a way, as like I feel like I was just starting to like this and then it's over, so it makes so this bigger half of it is just kind of not resting well in my memory.
Yeah, I wish he'd had a co-writer on this, because I think
Every movie.
yeah. I mean, I think he has a really good feel for the characters. The visuals are really fun. Some of the jokes are really funny. Just like I love them arriving on Halloween, and then the long section when that long gag where they wake up the next morning and it's actually like sort of this idyllic American suburb, and they're horrified by it. That's funny. Someone maybe to say, maybe don't do the Romani stereotype. I mean, you don't have to put it in every element of old horror movies. Some of them are kind of unfortunate. I kind of cringed with Lester the werewolf. That character was
Yes.
a little problematic.
But, goes without saying.
Yeah, but I feel like this film's heart is in its right place.
I forgot about
even even if it doesn't always quite execute the way it should.
Yeah, and I think that it is Zombie's weaknesses as a writer, especially that kind kind of kneecap this, because it's especially his attempts at, jokes and little comedic flourishes in his other movies that especially don't work for me. So I don't think he has the greatest grasp on comedic rhythm. And so much of this depends on the sitcom form for me, that, all the puns and the dumb jokes, which are right up my alley, are helped so much in the show by the laugh track, the multi-camera format. It all kind of ties together in this intentional way. And the way that he shoots this movie is so much just these characters like delivering puns to each other in silence with like canted angles and uncomfortable close-ups, which kills a lot of the humor for me, or it's like not letting it be hokey enough almost. And some of his own jokes are not great, just kind of retorts that are punchlines like, gee, you think, or even getting a little bit dirty, like a joke about, Uranus or grandpa looking at a Playboy spread. That just seemed like not quite on the mark. Although I agree, there are some lines and jokes that do work. My favorite by far that I remember is when grandpa is like, oh, I was out to dinner with Jack the Ripper last night, who, by the way, is no Jack the Tipper. I'm like, that could be in the original show.
Did you ever see the movie Munster Go Home?
No, I just now started realizing that there's a bunch of these Munster movies and I want to see them.
I did many years ago.
It was like, yeah, it's the original people. I think there's a different, might be a new Marilyn in that one, but otherwise it's the original cast. So like, it would be a third Marilyn at that point. But that it was made immediately after the show, and it's in color, and they go to England. I remember as a kid, I watched the show all the time. And then like I saw there's a movie of it, the Munster Go Home movie on TBS, which used to run this kind of thing all the time. And like, oh great, I'll watch that. I remember like watching as a kid, like, I don't know, do I like the Munsters? This movie's not very good. And I think it's what you're talking about, where it is the you kind of need, in some way, you need that sitcom format to work, or you need to rethink what the humor of the show is.
I totally agree. I mean, yeah, can we talk about the humor and why it doesn't work? I think it is, if you could just shoot it more like a sitcom, it would work better, or throw the laugh track in, because that is what was so like, it just felt so awkward that it was just one after another of just, the joke is that the joke is not funny. Which, again, I really like camp. I really love like just silly, like campy humor. But this felt like it was just purely like all about gags, like just someone telling a joke to you, or not, like maybe, and not even enough like visual gags and things like that. I don't know, maybe that would have helped more. But it was just really banking on Herman, which I did think was kind of an interesting little like aspect of the backstory, that like this is why Herman tells all these bad jokes in the sitcom, is because he used to be a stand-up comedian, rock star guy, like, and that's why he's always prone to this, a hack comedian. But
I didn't really understand why that was his origin story. Like, he needed an excuse for him to use bad puns. Like, why is everyone else talk that way too? Yeah. I don't understand where that idea came from.
It's true. Yeah. Everybody talks like that in this universe. So yeah, he's no different.
But I think that it's just essential that these characters are juxtaposed with the real world, of the normies all around them. And that's why the movie just starts to come to life in that last 20 minutes when they get to the neighborhood, and I start to actually have a little fun with it, because you are seeing that contrast as opposed to just kind of general cartoonishness that we get for the movie leading up to that. And I did have a really rough time with the guy playing Herman, and maybe it's because I was watching so much of the original show and I was looking for someone to capture his spirit more, and so much of just he was doing this kind of voice that was on its own that almost sounded more like a kind of Jerry Lewis, or even who's the guy who's on a couple of the Paul Lynde is in a couple of the original shows episodes that he almost reminded me of. So I did think he had the laugh down, he had some of the expressions down, but
he looked good.
Yeah, the character was just so not the like, Mike Brady send up that he was in the original. And maybe it was hard for me to get that out of my mind. Grandpa was really neither here nor there for me. Felt like he let the makeup do most of the work. So it was really, and also it's only a 5-person, stable cast in the original show. And because this is an origin story, we don't even get a hint of Eddie or Marilyn, the cousin. I don't know. Did you find that weird, Keith? That this we only
A little
we so
bit,
focused
yeah,
on these characters.
We even got Spot, but not Marilyn. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the origin story idea wasn't the way to do this. Perhaps it's that because you do lose, like you say, two key cast members. That, not to say nothing of the conflict that drives the show in the first place by doing it that way. And but yeah, that is like I don't know. Is there a way to do this where you just have the Herman and Lily falling in love parts, and then kind of maybe fast forward to the stuff at the end? I don't know. Maybe
it was cute.
Again,
sometimes
I'm not a comedy writer.
I'm
not a professional comedy writer, so perhaps
right.
you bring someone in who could answer those questions for you if you're making this film.
Sure.
Yeah,
I did find them kind of cute. Some of the back and forth with big bumbling Herman and Lily, mainly because it did feature Lily, which I did think was the strongest part of the movie. But yeah, some of that was cute. And it just didn't focus enough, I feel like. I don't know. I mean,
I'm willing
we were watching like a very bloated, like what should have been a 15-minute prologue or something to the actual movie. Yeah.
This is a very long and kind of strangely paced movie. And
Very
I don't know
odd.
if maybe he was being kind of overly optimistic that he's going to get to make another one of these movies where he
It feels
gets to
like
throw
that,
them in.
doesn't it? It feels like he's kind of, there was a kind of the, everything's a franchise, everything, gets sequels. So let's use this to set up Munsters 2, which I don't think we're going to get. It seems unlikely at this point.
I mean, he made a third Devil's Rejects or whatever. Who knows? He does what he wants. That is his whole thing.
Yeah, but I don't know if they're just like giving the keys to these characters again.
That's true. Yeah.
It is strange. It is strange though to beyond bringing in Zombie to begin with, which makes sense with him being a big fan, but to make this movie but not really give him a budget. I mean, it's really creative, but at the same time, the complete absence of name actors. I mean, I guess probably the biggest name is Jorge Garcia in the cast, right? Maybe Cassandra Peterson. There's nothing that's going to draw in people or have the production values that make it look like a major studio release. I'm not sure. And it would be really, I'd love to know the behind the scenes story of how this got made, to borrow the name of another podcast.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because I really do feel like there's a kind of cheapness to how this looks, which is very, very different from his other movies. That, I don't have a problem with the set design or the lighting and stuff, but I feel like when people talk about the kind of like uncinematic, like Netflix look of streaming films, like movies that are made for streaming, that this is what they're talking about. That it's very just kind of flat, bright, not much texture, almost like it was shot on an iPhone or something. And you compare that to, like Halloween 2, one of the things that we liked about it, or I liked about it when we were discussing the film, that for all of the issues that I had with it, it is just so atmospheric and so good looking in a way that a lot of horror movies don't even bother with nowadays. And I didn't get any of that from this. And
what?
It's like, I mean, there's the
it's
whole
got
day
lights
glow.
Everywhere
I know
for you, Marc.
It's got all the day glow colors and the light filters and everything, but the actual way it was shot, just these, long wide shots interchanging with these canted close-ups, it didn't just seem very uncreative and just kind of
quite
ugly
the opposite.
to me.
I don't understand. Quite the opposite.
They
cut to looking through a porthole all of a sudden for no reason. That's not as out of the ordinary, Marc.
For the Munsters, it sure is.
Because
think
he's
you're
so
wrong.
deliberate, I almost have to wonder if this was by design. Like it's supposed to look this way. They covered this on the Flophouse podcast. I don't know if you guys listen to that. It's very good. But someone referred to it as kind of looking like a live action. I think they said live action Disney Channel movie from the 90s, which it really does kind of have that.
It totally.
Look to it.
That's what
And
struck
I wonder
me.
if that was like a choice to go for. I don't know though. I'm not. Again, I'd love to know some behind the scenes. There's a Blu-ray with a feature-length audio commentary from Zombie. I'm tempted to pick it up just to get some answers to some of these questions.
I almost would have rather watched that than the movie the way that it was. Like that would have been a lot more interesting.
Well, it at least reminded me of like Moonbeam Entertainment, which did like these runs of weird children's movies like Spooky Town and like Train World, they're all just these strangely surreal, like low budget but like very visually strange children's movies. Like it reminded me of that aesthetic, if anything, and that's what kept me going with this. Or like a big budget George Kuchar flick or something. Big for George, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely stands out from his other work in that way. But it was another thing that just kind of fell flat for me.
See, I don't get that at all. It looks like his music videos. It looks like all his stuff. What are you talking about? It's all like visually crazy stuff that he does.
I don't know. I think he was put a lot of energy into building, the sets and the costumes and everything. And that, I don't know, maybe his true calling is like designing a haunted house you can walk through. Like that seems to be where he put all of his energy,
Yes.
But I don't know.
You think this is less visually stimulating than Halloween 2?
Oh, I do, but that's just because I'm not giving as much points just for like the lighting and stuff as I think that you are. It really, it did not seem like cinematic to me in any way.
Yeah, it's been a while for me since
not
Halloween
really.
2, but I do remember it looking. He did kind of look like it was shot on a film stock from the 70s or 80s, if I remember correctly. And this does not have that. And that's, if you're asking me, if you want to see a movie that's shot like that or one that's shot like this, I'm going to choose the former every time. Yeah, there is that. But I did not feel like when the trailer first came out, it got passed around the internet. It's like, what is this?
It was weird.
Yeah, but I feel like watching the whole thing, the look of it makes more sense than just the shock of seeing in a trailer. It does feel like this was the plan. Now, whether that or not was a good plan, I'm not sure, but it does feel like more of a complete vision when you watch the whole film versus just seeing the glimpses of it in the trailer.
Yeah, I see that. And it does look pretty different by the time they're, in their neighborhood at the end of the movie. And maybe that's just because of the lighting. But yeah, it just ended right at the moment when I wanted it to start.
Yes.
And that was very strange. Not even a like, oh, I'm pregnant now, like a little tease of Eddie or nothing. It just was kind of like, all right, we're done here. And he got
we
out.
only get the
Lester
theme
showing up
like
and
right
saying,
at the end.
I'm rich. I won big in Vegas and now we're all rich, which almost feels like a setup for a Beverly Hillbillies movie,
Right.
But,
Yeah.
oh well.
Yeah, I don't know. He might have just kind of blew his shot at the movie, unless he does get to make another one. But I won't be watching it if he does, unless we have to for this podcast.
Oh, Bob's making another one. There's no stopping Bob.
Yeah, we'll see. And again, good for him. He's kind of someone who's, like Keith said, I appreciate the spirit, and I kind of was. This is a whole other topic that may be another can of worms, but someone like Jordan Peele right now keeps making these ambitious movies that I'm like, yeah, man, keep giving him the resources to make more and more, even though I'm yet to have one that works like completely for me. But this is still, I don't know. I'll give another chance to another Rob Zombie Netflix movie. Better him than another, like Ryan Murphy project or something.
Mm-hmm.
But so I think this is worth asking the question maybe for this movie of, would you unwatch it if you could? Because we went into this with a, that this was a spirit of these are going to be movies that are nice and, gentle and silly and enjoyable and not tough to get through, in the sense that, a lot of the movies that we talk about actually are. But I personally ended up really not liking this movie. And I think I actually would, in the sense that, that we use it on this podcast, I might not mind unwatching it. So I don't know. Would anyone else react that violently to it as I did?
No, I can't hate this movie.
Okay.
And I'm actually kind of fond of it. Would I watch it again is another question, but there are many other movies I felt like wasted my time by being, derivative or uninspired or mean-spirited or whatever you want to call it. This is none of that. This is a genuine attempt to make a Munsters movie. I can't get mad at it.
Yeah, it has a unique zombie flavor to it that keeps me like kind of staying with it, but part of me does want to just mute it the whole time because I don't know, I really wanted to like this. I really wanted to like see this as like a strange, like exciting little anomaly as Rob Zombie comedy, but that is just often the case like with all his movies, that his humor is just, it really rubs me the wrong way. It just is so like poorly handled, and I think a whole movie of that was just a lot for me. I'm not gonna unwatch it because I do like it visually. I do think it is, it's at least more interesting than some of the remakes that come out. And not altogether for like good reasons. Some of them are just like, wow, what a strange idea, but it's at least something. But yeah, for the most part, the humor really makes it a slog for me, personally.
All right. Well, you broke the tie then. The movie gets to be watched another day.
Yep, you have to watch it again, Mark.
Yeah, that's my punishment.
Yeah, that's how it should work. That's what we'll do on the podcast from now on. Like if there's a tie, like this, the person who hated it the most has to watch it again.
All right, I'll keep that in mind.
I'm going to make sure you follow through.
All right. Well, Keith, I really want to thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Tony, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, speaking of revisits, please go listen to our Rob Zombie episode. We're wrapping up year one of a pretty successful podcast, and for whatever reason, that is the Ugly Stepchild episode for us. It has like half as many listens as all the others. Really good episode. No guest on that one, just Marc and Seth talking about Rob Zombie. So that's my...
And I have COVID on air.
Oh, that's the one you had COVID on. There you go. There's your hook. So for all of our new listeners we've been gaining, that's... my self plug for the Rob Zombie episode nobody likes.
Rob Zombie gave Seth COVID. Oh dear. But yeah, anyways, Keith, it was a really fun discussion, and thank you for, this basically was, the films that you picked off of the list too, and I think it was a really great idea, and it was really interesting revisiting both of these. For
some of the other films on the list, actually, I won't reveal your secrets, but some of the other films on the list that you're still planning to do kind of scared me to watch. So this seems like a pretty pleasant way to spend a few hours watching these two films.
Yeah, we have that effect, unfortunately, on people.
Yeah, well, this is a nice little gift to our listeners, since this will be, I believe, our last episode of the year coming out, closest to Christmas time. So
it's just going to be hateful, violent, sadistic stuff for the rest of the year, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A little break before we plunge back into the darkness in 2023. But yeah, so Keith, is there anything else that you out there that you want to plug or give a heads up to, for anyone who might be listening?
You did a great job plugging all my stuff at the beginning of the show. The reveal is at thereveal.substack.com. It's where Scott and I put a lot of our energies. Nextpictureshow.net is where our podcast is. I'm on Twitter as KPhipps3000. I'm on there increasingly less these days, but I do tend to post what I'm writing on there. So that's, it's a good place to catch up with me, I guess. As long as it lasts and before it's swarmed by the most vile people in the world. That's a negative note to end on. But yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
The
All
death
right,
of Twitter is fine. It's not a negative thing. We can escape Twitter.
yes.
Let it burn.
We'll see. Yeah, if it doesn't burn down by the time this episode airs, definitely find Keith on there because you can get all of this information, as well as links to all the new stuff coming out.
Yeah, Keith, we appreciate you, Keith. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, I will go listen to the Rob Zombie episode after we're done recording. Well, maybe not right away, but definitely.
Oh my god!
Yeah, maybe give yourself a buffer before you dive into that one. Maybe that'd be important.
All right, that's one more listen we can bump up for that one.
Right, there we go.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.